It's great to have you after the football game, and I'm also very relieved at the result. I'll be able to go home to a happy family. That's good. I was going to stand there, but then I bit too close to the secretary, and I wasn't going to see you. So is it okay if I stand here? Right. So I want to talk to you about money, and I know we all think we know what money is because after all we deal with it every day on an everyday basis. But actually there's a great deal that's unknown about the nature of money. And the reason I say that is that I'm currently in a big dispute with the Financial Times. And I spent this morning doing a televised interview with Martin Sandbu, who's one of the leader writers on the Financial Times, in which I challenged him on his understanding of the nature of money. Both he, Martin Wolf, and one other, Matthew Klein, all of them serious and wonderful economists on the FT, don't appear to understand the very basis of Western capitalism, the banking and the financial system, and they call themselves the Financial Times. So if they're not clear about it, then I'm sure the wider public, and I don't include you because of course you're all very well educated and very much on the board on these things, but the wider public has even less grasp of the really key elements of our monetary system and what makes it work. Now, perhaps I'll just say a little bit about myself. As was said, I'm a Keynesian monetary theorist. I am a great admirer of John Maynard Keynes. I feel he's been wrongly defined as a tax and spend economist. He's constantly characterized as someone who's obsessed by fiscal policy. He had a deep, deep disinterest in fiscal policy. He believed that it should never be necessary for governments to resort to using fiscal policy to stabilize the economy. We should never ever get into that position. But if we do get into that position, because the financial system implodes as it did in 1929, then government has to step in and bail out the financial system. He understood that much. But he really was vehemently opposed to ever getting into that position. His real obsession was with monetary theory and monetary policy and managing the financial system, not allowing the financial system to be led and guided by something called the invisible hand. So I want to begin by saying that Keynes is often misrepresented and maligned, and I very much believe, and I know I'm almost with complete confidence that none of your lecturers here teach Keynes and Keynes' monetary theory and policy, because he's not even taught in his alma mater, Cambridge. They pretend that he was a sort of novelist who wrote interesting books about the economy, and they don't teach him, so I doubt they teach him here. And that is a great loss. It explains, A, the fact that we've had recurring financial crises since the 1970s, and that we're going to have another one. And it's going to be devastating, the next one. And we're going to have less tools, there'll be fewer monetary tools with which to deal with the next crisis. We used up those tools. We've used up the ability to lower interest rates. Interest rates have become negative in some parts of the world and have been made negative by some central banks. One of the reasons why the governor of the Federal Reserve, Mr. Jerome Powell, is now so determined to raise interest rates is that he needs what he calls headroom to deal with the next financial crisis. He needs interest rates to be up there in order to be able to bring them down when we have the next financial crisis. Now, doesn't that instill confidence in all of us that the governor of the Federal Reserve has to raise interest rates to give himself some room for dealing with the next crisis, which means that they really believe there will be another one, and quite soon. And unfortunately, in Keynes' view, if Keynes was here, he would be arguing that putting up interest rates at this point in the economic cycle, both globally and in different countries, is a disaster, is the thing that will trigger the next crisis. And I want to say a little bit about that, because most economists argue that the last financial crisis was caused by a collapse in house prices or a fall in house prices. In reality, the crisis was caused by the determination of Alan Greenspan to systematically raise interest rates. He'd had to lower interest rates dramatically at the time of the dot-com bubble to deal with that crisis, which was just one of many crises that had been occurring across the world. And in order to deal with that, he lowered interest rates and then felt obliged to take the punch bowl away from the finance sector and raise interest rates. And began systematically. If you look at a chart of interest rates before the crisis, you'll see that the steps, every monthly meeting of the Fed, a little jump took place in the rate of interest, until interest rates became like a dagger pointed at a vast bubble of debt and exploded that debt, because that debt became unpayable at high rates of interest. And the same is going to happen again. Even when Mr. Powell just hinted at the possibility of raising rates, global capital markets got into the jitter. Stock markets began to fall. Emerging markets began to panic. And indeed they are panicking because he's determinedly going ahead with it. At his first meeting, he put up interest rates and notched them up a little. At the second meeting, when there was some anxiety about the state of the American economy, he hesitated and didn't put up rates. But at his third meeting, he's begun to put up rates. And the governor of the Reserve, the Indian Central Bank, has written formally to him saying, what you're doing is causing ructions and reverberations in emerging markets, and that can be ultimately catastrophic for the global economy. Do they care? No, the Americans don't care. They control the dollar, the reserve currency of the world. The dollar is their currency and our problem and the world's problem. So Keynes is misunderstood and misrepresented, and largely because his understanding of money, which wasn't new, has been disregarded. And but I'd like to just take us back, because actually John Law, great economist, and Joseph Schumpeter describes him as one of the greatest monetary theorists of all time, John Law, wrote about and understood money and the need for a monetary system back in 1705. Right? So we have had an understanding of money which has been gained and then lost. Schumpeter understood money. Keynes understood money. J.K. Galbraith understood money. And what has happened is that this understanding has been won and then lost, won and then lost. And that's not surprising, because we're engaged in a struggle. Society is engaged in a struggle with the finance sector. And the finance sector really is quite content for us not to understand what it's doing and what it's about. That way they can go about their business undisturbed and make loads of money and not be bothered by government intervention, regulation, or management of the financial system. And the economics profession has obliged the finance sector. How many of you who've studied economics have studied money, banking, debt, or the financial system in your course? You have? Well done, good. That's unusual, because most students don't study money, banking, and debt as undergraduates, and even as postgraduates. Economists as sound as Paul Krugman believe that banks act as intermediaries between patient borrowers on the one hand and patient lenders on the one hand and impatient borrowers on the other. They're simply intermediaries. I put my savings in the bank and the bank lends it to someone who needs money. And that has not been the case since 1694, when the Bank of England was founded. Indeed, it was not the case before that, when the Florentine bankers basically designed and invented the banking system, and the Dutch bankers imitated them, and then finally the English decided they had to imitate the Dutch, because the Dutch had a flourishing, prosperous commercial sector, and we did not. And our bankers and those who managed the economy understood that one of the reasons why Britain was falling behind Holland was because we didn't have a sound banking system. So the Bank of England was founded in 1694. So what is money? What is money? Believe it or not, this is not really understood, but Joseph Schumpeter did understand money. And Joseph Schumpeter explained that money is nothing more than a promise to pay. That's all it is. When I go into a coffee shop in the morning and I wave a card at a machine, I'm not exchanging my card for anything. This is not barter. I'm not giving the shop something and the shop returns the coffee to me. I'm waving a card over a machine, and I'm taking the card and I'm putting it back in my pocket. And with that, I'm able to purchase the coffee. I'm able to undertake a transaction. What I'm doing when I show the card to this machine, it reads this card, and the card says, you can trust Anne Pettifor to pay for her coffee. There's enough money in the bank. Signed, NatWest Bank, or whatever it is the bank is. NatWest Bank knows me as a customer. I have an agreement with NatWest Bank. I've signed a contract, and I've promised to pay. And the bank has promised that in return for a small fee, for a writing fee, they will manage my transactions. So when I wave this card at the machine, I'm promising to pay, nothing more than that, and I put it back into my pocket. Now, because money has often been a tangible thing, coins and notes and things, it's been difficult to understand that it's just a promise to pay. The note represents the promise. It says on the back, I promise to pay. It just represents the promise, right? But it isn't the promise. I am the promise. I am the one that is saying, I will pay. I will pay, right? And now, you know, this system is a wonderful system. It means we don't have to go into the vaults of a bank and dig up gold and take it out and repackage it and use it in exchange for goods or services. And we never have done that, at least not since 1694. But economists, on the whole, mainstream economists, orthodox economists, think of money as a commodity. Think of the fact that my promise to pay is subject to the forces of supply and demand. You know, there could be a shortage of promises, or there could be an excess of promises. And that the price of money, the rate of interest, is the result of the supply and demand of money. And nothing can be further from the truth. So it's just a promise to pay. Now the problem with a promise is it has to be upheld. We don't trust each other, and we shouldn't trust each other because there are a lot of crooks amongst us. And so we have to sign a contract, and the contract is underpinned by a criminal justice system. If I don't uphold the contract, I can go to jail, or I can suffer a penalty of some kind or other. We need to have an accounting system that balances assets and liabilities and counts, and who owes what to whom, credits and debts and so on. You need a sound accounting system. So you need a criminal justice system backed up by the judicial system. You need an accounting system. You need a central bank which issues the currency and that maintains the value of the currency. And how does the central bank do that? Well, the last and most important institution of the monetary system is the tax collection system. The tax collection system means that the debts that are incurred by the central bank or by the government will be repaid because there is a sound tax collection system backing up the central bank and the currency. And the central bank has to be independent on the whole, right? With these institutions in place, there is never, ever a shortage of money. We can never run out of money. So when the politicians say to you, there is no money, I think the most famous one was a Labour politician, Liam Byrne, who left a note saying there is no money. It is as well to laugh them out of court. It is utterly laughable. When the government, the Bank of England, finds £1,000 billion to bail out the banking system overnight, he hasn't gone around with a tin collecting taxes to pay for the bill of bailing out the banks. He's used the monetary system and the ability of the monetary system to generate credit and to pay and to bail out banks, essentially. So with these institutions in place, we would never, ever have a shortage of money. Now, it's not quite as simple as that, and I'll explain that more. But I want you to imagine that you live in a country like Malawi, where I've worked. And in Malawi, they don't have a sound criminal justice system. They don't enforce contracts. The policemen don't come and knock on your door if you renege on your contract, right? The judicial system is probably not entirely sound, right? They don't have a sound accounting system. Well-trained, well-developed accountants with great accounting standards. They don't have a tax collection system. They don't collect taxes. Mainly their people are very poor, but they don't have the institutional systems needed for collecting taxes. Right? They don't employ enough tax collectors for a start. Right? And they don't have an independent central bank on the whole. It's a very small country. Politicians are pretty corrupt and so on and so forth. And the central bank quite often gets diverted from its purpose. I've seen that happen. I've worked in Nigeria. In Nigeria, a good friend of mine was the government's central bank and had to resign because the politicians put undue pressure. Right? That doesn't happen here. Our governor of our central bank is a political appointment. There's an awful lot of political pressure. But on the whole, our central bank is independent, as indeed is the governor of the Federal Reserve and the Bank of Japan and the ECB. Independent of, for example, German policy makers that would want Maria Draghi to do something quite different. With these institutions in place, there need never be a shortage of money. Without institutions like that, we can understand that Malawi has no money. It has no money. It has to rely on US dollars coming in, or sterling, or whatever. Then that causes, they are subject to exchange rate fluctuations and so on. They are dependent on foreigners for money. We're not dependent on foreigners for money. We did not join the euro. We have an independent central bank that can create money and that can manage the money creation process. Now, the thing that most people believe is that, and most orthodox economists, monetarists and so on believe, is that the central bank creates the money supply. No way, no way. 95% of the money created in Britain is created by the private commercial banks. The central bank, even with QE, creates something like 5% of the total money supply at the most. In the United States, it's 99% of the money supply is created by private commercial banks. And how's that done? That is done when you and I, or a firm, a company, applies for a loan to the bank. The bank has the power to deny us that loan, to deny us the ability to borrow. But on the whole, it doesn't. It ought to assess whether or not we're risky and whether or not the loan is going to be spent on productive activity that will generate income and repay the debt that is the loan. That's the job of the bank. The bank's job is to make a risk assessment of every application for a loan. If they assess that the loan is sustainable, that it could be repaid, that the collateral being offered is good, and that the income generated is likely to be sufficient, they should make the loan, right? And that's all that happens. Now, there is a movement in Britain called positive money that argues that banks are wicked and they create credit and they create debt and this is evil and we should banish the banks. And we should strip them of those powers, right? The fact is that we are, the borrowers, have the real power. If we don't apply for a loan, if we don't ask to borrow, the banks are powerless. If borrowers don't ask the central bank for QE, the central bank is impotent in applying monetary policy and in transmitting that policy through the economy. It does need borrowers, right? So while banks are powerful, no question, we are really the powerful ones. We expand the money supply when we're feeling confident. When feeling euphoric, we go crazy and borrow crazy money, believing that the economy is going to boom forever, right? When there's a slump, we lose all confidence and we crash in and we restrict our borrowing. Firms cut back on their borrowing, the money supply contracts and the economy contracts. And that is terrible. That's what happened after the crisis. It always happens after crisis. So the power to create money out of thin air is our power. We exercise it, or not, if we choose not to. Banks can legitimize that power, or they can deny us that power. But if we choose not to borrow, the banks are in deep trouble. I think this is really important. Professor Charles Goodhart reviewed my book, which is a very accessible book called The Production of Money. And he wrote to me, he said, I'm so pleased that you emphasize this point. Most economists don't understand, he said, the role of the borrower in creating the money supply. Now, the reason I'm in a tussle with the Financial Times is Financial Times thinks that the banks create money, and they create credit out of thin air, and they're dangerous, and they're reckless, and it's all very bad and wicked. And I just want to say that I do believe many bankers are bad and wicked. But for that reason, the Financial Times has argued that the power to create money should be taken away from private commercial banks and should be put into the hands of a committee of men, and let's face it, there'll be men, and the committee of men at the top of the world, unelected, unaccountable, will decide on the money supply for the nation. Now, if you don't believe me, go and look up Martin Wolf on the Financial Times, or Martin Sambu, or Matthew Klein. Right? They've all written saying that they support this. And last Sunday in Switzerland, there was a referendum for exactly this kind of monetary system. And they call it the Vollgeld, V-O-L-L-G-E-L-D, to create sovereign money, they said, which would be created by a committee of men at the top of the world. Fortunately, the people of Switzerland were sensible enough to defeat this idea. But the idea that the Financial Times is arguing this, I, as a left-wing socialist, find it extraordinary. Because the joy of the capitalist system is the fact that it's democratic almost in nature, that the creation of the money supply is something that is done by you and I active in the real economy. We decide on the money supply and we contract the money supply. If you take that away from us and you give it to some committee who may get it wrong, who may decide we're not going to have any money tomorrow, but we will have more the day after, that is authoritarian. And why is the Financial Times advocating it? They're advocating that because they lack a proper understanding of money, because they went to university and they were not taught monetary theory and policy, right? And they definitely were not taught Keynes. Keynes is regarded as some sort of ultra-lefty radical outlier that should not be talked about, and his name should not be mentioned in polite society. So that's why we're in this mess, because if you don't understand the nature of money and credit creation and the monetary system, how the hell can you manage it? Why doesn't an older woman called Anne Pettifor, who's no great shakes really, isn't a professor of economics or anything, isn't a governor of the central bank, why can she write a book in 2006 predicting the financial crisis, and all those clever clogs on the board of the Bank of England or in the Treasury weren't able to see it coming? For me, it was blindingly obvious that the system was going to blow up. Blindingly obvious, and I wrote a book. The book was called The Coming First World Debt Crisis, and it was published in September 2006. And I was really angry at the publisher. I said, I don't like First World, Third World, that's very derogatory. Secondly, you're calling it The Coming First World Debt Crisis. By September 2006, it would have come. And then my book would be out of date, I said. I was wrong. Fortunately, I was wrong. And to my absolute astonishment, the system expanded and blew up and carried on until August 2007, when banks froze interbank lending and the thing finally blew up, right? But actually, the most public don't believe anything happened until September 2008, when Lehman's blew up. I'm being asked to go to all sorts of meetings and events and media things to celebrate 10 years after the crisis, because everyone believes Lehman's was the crisis. The crisis began in 9th of August 2007. Anyway, while I was able to predict it, of course, I got the timing wrong, and it's very hard to get the timing and the triggers of crises right. But if you don't understand the monetary system, if you don't know how it works, there is absolutely no chance that you're able to predict the crisis. And secondly, there's no chance that you can do something to manage it. And that should horrify all of us, really. You will pay the price of the next financial crisis. You will lose your jobs. Your houses will be unaffordable. You won't be able to sell your properties that you'll have paid a lot of money for and borrowed a lot of money to purchase, right? Because their prices will fall and nobody will want to buy. People will be too indebted to buy your property from you, and so you'll lower the price again and again, right? But that you'll get it below what you ever borrowed for to pay for it. And that will put you into negative equity, and it'll be very, very serious. So you are going to be affected by the next crisis, I can assure you. So it should be frightening to all of us that our masters, our economic masters, our governors, our politicians, but above all, our professional economists don't understand that, and the Financial Times don't understand that. So I'm on a mission, because I don't want to see another financial crisis. The people that were most hurt by that were the ones least responsible for it. The reason we see today, and this is what really, really scared me. Today we're watching Germany implode, right? We're watching the Christian Democrats falling out with their partners, their Bavarian partners, over the question of immigration. Tomorrow they may well join up with the AfD, who are fascists, in an anti-immigrant stand, right? We get an alliance of the Bavarian Christian Democrats and the AfD. We've got fascism in Germany, right? It could happen tomorrow. Mrs. Merkel is rushing around Europe trying to do something about immigration policy to prevent that happening. Why do we have fascists in Europe? For the same reason we had fascism in Europe in the 1920s and 1930s. Because we had a massive financial crisis. The poor people there, those innocent of the crisis, were the most damaged by it. And they were angry, mad as hell. They were mad as hell at a system which politicians said was beyond their control. The markets, the invisible hand is managing all this, said the politician. Nothing to do with me, God. So if you've lost your job and your house and your status and all your savings, tough, because you're being disciplined by the market, said the politicians. So the people said, if that's what you think, I'm going to go and find me a strong man to protect me from those forces. And Hitler came along and he said, I will protect you from these uncontrolled forces that have destroyed your lives, right? And what happened in the United States? People in the Rust Belt and all over the United States feel terribly insecure, terribly worried. They were hurt by the financial crisis. Nothing has been fixed since then. They found themselves a strong man, Mr. Trump, who said he was going to build a wall against Mexico. He's going to build a wall against the Chinese. He's going to put America first. That was the fascist slogan that was the slogan of the fascists in America in the 1930s, Lindbergh and co. Right? So we have all this coming back again. Why? Because we've allowed our economic and financial system to implode. Why? Because we refuse to understand the nature of money and we refuse to manage the financial system. Now, I'm a great admirer of the monetary system. I've lived and worked in Malawi. I do not want a system like that, right? I understand that we live in a world with a highly civilized and developed, carefully developed, over centuries, monetary system, which ensures that we'll always have money. When our banks fail, we can find £1,000 billion overnight. Thank God. So I'm a great admirer, unlike the Financial Times, I'm a great admirer of the monetary system. But it has to be managed. It has to be managed in the interests of society. It cannot be allowed to detach itself from social interest, from political interest, and operate independently of society. And if it does that at great cost to society and causes instability and political rupture, and we all pay the price. I do not want to have to fight another war against fascism. I do not want my grandsons to have to fight another war against fascism. So I'm passionate about, please can we understand how the monetary system works? Can we manage it, stabilize it, and subordinate it to the interests of society? Thank you very much.